A significant diplomatic effort aimed at de-escalating the rising tensions in the Middle East has collapsed in a dramatic and startling fashion. A ceasefire painstakingly negotiated between Israel and Iran was violated just hours after it was announced. The agreement was meant to be a landmark step towards stability, a moment of reprieve from the drumbeat of war that has echoed across the region for months. The news of the ceasefire's acceptance had brought a cautious sense of optimism to international observers. However, that hope was short-lived, replaced by the grim reality of renewed conflict. The world watched as the promise of peace evaporated almost as quickly as it had appeared. The breaking point came when Israel launched a series of attacks against targets within Iran. This aggressive action completely shattered the terms of the newly brokered truce. The international community was taken by surprise, as the ink on the agreement had barely had time to dry. The move was a stark reversal of the commitments that had been made, sending a clear message that the path to a lasting peace would be far more difficult than anticipated. The reasons behind the sudden Israeli offensive are still being analyzed, but the immediate consequence was the complete unraveling of a fragile diplomatic achievement. The ceasefire was not just broken, it was decisively destroyed. This sudden escalation has thrown the entire region back into a state of high alert. The careful negotiations, which involved multiple international partners, now seem to be in ruins. The incident underscores the deep-seated animosity and mistrust that defines the relationship between Israel and Iran, a reality that even the most determined diplomatic efforts struggle to overcome. The international community is now left to grapple with the fallout, questioning what steps can be taken next to prevent a wider, more devastating conflict. The brief glimmer of peace has been extinguished, leaving behind a landscape of uncertainty and renewed fear across the Middle East. The news of the broken ceasefire landed with particular force in Washington, where former President Donald Trump had been the central figure in brokering the deal. He had invested significant personal and political capital in bringing both sides to the table. The swift collapse of the agreement was not just a foreign policy setback. It was seen as a direct repudiation of his efforts. Reports quickly emerged from sources close to the former president detailing his reaction. He was described as being intensely frustrated and deeply annoyed by the turn of events, a reaction that would soon focus with particular intensity on one of the key players involved in the talks. Former President Donald Trump had positioned himself as the primary architect of this ambitious peace initiative. He believed that his unique brand of personal diplomacy could succeed where more traditional methods had failed. In the days leading up to the announcement, Trump was personally engaged in securing the agreement. He saw an opportunity to forge a historic foreign policy victory, one that would calm a volatile region and demonstrate his capabilities as a global deal-maker. His approach was direct and hands-on, bypassing many of the usual diplomatic channels to engage with the leaders themselves. This was a high-stakes gamble, one that relied entirely on his personal relationships and powers of persuasion. The diplomatic process was a carefully orchestrated two-step maneuver. Trump's first and most critical move was to secure the backing of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. According to reports, Trump personally spoke with Netanyahu on Monday, making a direct appeal for him to support the ceasefire proposal. This conversation was seen as the cornerstone of the entire effort. Trump believed that if he could get a firm commitment from the Israeli leader, a man with whom he has had a long and complex relationship, the rest of the pieces would fall into place. He expended considerable effort to ensure Netanyahu was on board before moving forward with the second phase of his plan. Once he believed he had Netanyahu's solid support, Trump turned his attention to Tehran. To bridge the gap with the Iranian leadership, he enlisted the help of a key regional intermediary, Qatar. The Qatari government was tasked with presenting the ceasefire proposal to Iran and securing its agreement. This indirect approach was necessary given the lack of formal diplomatic relations between the United States and Iran. By leveraging Qatar's influence, Trump's team managed to get both warring parties to publicly agree to the terms. It was a moment of apparent triumph, a complex diplomatic puzzle that seemed to have been solved through a combination of direct negotiation and strategic partnerships. The successful announcement of the ceasefire was timed just as Trump was preparing to depart for a NATO summit in Europe. It was intended to be a major diplomatic victory that he could carry with him onto the world stage, showcasing his ability to bring stability to the world's most troubled regions. The deal was framed as a testament to his transactional and relationship-driven foreign policy style. The subsequent collapse of the agreement, therefore, was not just a disappointment, it was a personal blow that struck at the very heart of his diplomatic identity, and occurred at a moment when the world's attention was firmly upon him. The news that both Israel and Iran had violated the ceasefire reached Donald Trump as he was preparing for his trip, and his reaction was one of immediate and intense anger. He was reportedly furious with both sides for discarding the agreement so quickly. The hard work of his team and his international partners had been undone in a matter of hours, turning a potential triumph into a public failure. Trump viewed the violations as a sign of profound disrespect, not only for the process but for him personally. His initial frustration was directed at both capitals for their inability to hold to their commitments for even a single day. However, as more details emerged, the focus of Trump's anger sharpened considerably. While he was disappointed with Iran, his extra fury, as one source described it, was aimed squarely at Israel and its leader, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This was because Trump felt he had received a personal assurance from the Israeli Prime Minister. He had invested his time and credibility in a direct phone call to secure Netanyahu's backing. The subsequent Israeli attack was therefore not just a strategic move in a regional conflict. In Trump's eyes, it was a direct and personal betrayal of a promise made between two leaders. This feeling of being deceived is central to understanding Trump's reaction. He operates on a worldview where personal loyalty and keeping one's word are paramount, especially among leaders. He believed he had a deal, a handshake agreement sealed over the phone. When Netanyahu's government acted contrary to that understanding, Trump saw it as a personal slight. According to reports from US media, he felt quite annoyed and fundamentally betrayed by the Israeli Prime Minister's actions. The perceived deception was a greater offense to him than the simple act of breaking the ceasefire itself, transforming a policy disagreement into a personal grievance. The context of their long-standing relationship makes this sense of betrayal even more acute. Trump had often touted his strong support for Israel and his close bond with Netanyahu during his presidency. He had made several policy decisions, such as moving the US embassy to Jerusalem, that were highly favorable to Netanyahu's government. In return, he expected loyalty and reliability. The unilateral Israeli strike, coming after a personal appeal from Trump, was seen as a breakdown of that unspoken pact. It was a clear signal that the relationship he thought he had with the Israeli leader was not as solid as he had believed. This entire episode serves as a powerful and stark reminder of a fundamental principle in international relations. Trust is the essential currency of diplomacy. Without it, negotiations are merely conversations, and agreements are just words on paper, liable to be torn up at the first sign of pressure. The rapid collapse of the Israel-Iran ceasefire illustrates this point perfectly. The deal was not ultimately broken by military force, but by a preceding breakdown in trust. When one party believes the other is not acting in good faith, the foundation of any potential peace crumbles into dust, leaving very little room for future cooperation. For any peace process to have a chance of success, the leaders involved must have a baseline level of confidence in one another's commitments. This does not require them to be friends or even to like each other, but it does demand a belief that when a promise is made, it will be honored. This is especially true in high-stakes negotiations where the consequences of failure can be catastrophic. Leaders must be able to rely on the assurances they receive from their counterparts. When that reliance is shattered by a unilateral action, as it was in this case, the damage can be irreparable, poisoning the well for any future attempts at dialogue. Donald Trump's intense frustration with Benjamin Netanyahu was rooted in this very concept. His anger stemmed from the belief that a personal commitment, a leader-to-leader assurance, had been violated. This perceived betrayal undermined the entire effort because it destroyed the trust that Trump had placed in his Israeli counterpart. The incident demonstrates that in the world of diplomacy, personal relationships and perceived reliability can be just as important as strategic calculations or military strength. A leader who is seen as untrustworthy will find it increasingly difficult to find partners willing to take risks for the sake of peace. Ultimately, the lesson from this collapsed ceasefire is a timeless one. Lasting peace cannot be built on a foundation of suspicion and deception. It requires courage, compromise, and above all, a degree of mutual trust that allows leaders to step back from the brink of conflict. The path to stability in the Middle East or any volatile region is paved with reliable commitments and honored promises. When that trust is broken, the path forward becomes obscured and the cycle of conflict is destined to continue, making the prospects for a peaceful resolution more distant than ever before. Leaders must remember that their word is their bond, and in diplomacy that bond is everything.